Welcome back. Let's discuss a vulnerability called XXE. Now, first of all, what does XXE stand for? It stands for XML Entity Injection. It happens once an application takes the user input in XML format and it processes external entities that are declared inside of it. If that happens, it could be vulnerable to XXE or XML Entity Injection. Let's take a look at the example of this vulnerability on our BWAP application. So let's go to choose our bug, scroll a little bit down till A7, and all the way down we have XML Internal Entity Attacks, or in brackets XXE. Select that and click on Hack. This will load this very simple application. There is no user input here, all we have is this reset your secret to any bugs. So this is a button. Let's see what happens once we click it. It appears that nothing really happens. Let's try intercepting this request inside of our burp suite. So go up here, turn on the intercept, and let's click on any bugs. We get this request. And if we take a look at down here, we have the application processing some input in XML format. And remember what that means? If it also processes our external entities that we are going to inject, it could be vulnerable to XXE. But before we actually get to injecting anything, let's first send this request to the repeater. Let's go Action and Send to Repeater. We can turn off the intercept and navigate to the repeater. If we take a closer look, we're going to notice that this request is sending XML structure with our username, so this is our account on BWAP application, and with a secret. So let's try ejecting a simple payload to see whether this is vulnerable to XXE. And the payload that we are going to inject will be this one. I'm just going to type it in payload.txt real quick, and then we're going to copy it to burp suite. So this will be our payload. Doc type test, let's call it test. Then we open square brackets and we create our own entity like this. We type capital entity. Let's call the entity internal -entity and let's name it boss. So close off all of the tags and this will be our payload. So essentially what we're doing right here is we're creating an entity called internal entity, which will have a value of boss. And boss will be a new user that we're going to try to switch inside of our payload. Now, how are we going to know whether this works? Well, if we go to our burp suite and we send this simple request, in the response to this request, we get this sentence right here. It says B's secret has been reset. If our payload gets processed inside of this request, then here it will say boss secret has been reset. Let's give it a try. Let's go and copy our payload. Let's put it up here right above the XML code that they have. So let's paste it right here. And this is not the only thing that we must do. We must also change this part right here. Since we want to change the user, we also want to specify which user we want right here. And the user that we want is stored in this internal entity. So all we have to do is specify it right here. To do that, we use this sign, and then we specify the name of our entity, or in our case, internal-entity, and semicolon at the end. Once we send this payload, here it is. We get boss secret has been reset. It's no longer the user B. In this payload that we created, this internal entity that has a value of boss is used within the login structure, and it got reflected right here in the response. This means that everything will load through this entity the server will process and reflect. So let's try with even more dangerous payload. Let's try to cat the content of @c passwd. We can do that by typing this command or this payload doctype. Let's call it test and open square brackets. We want to create entity once again. And we can call it anything we want. We can call it xxe if we want, or we can just stick with internal entity. This is pretty much your choice how you're going to call it. And now we're going to call a parameter called system. Make sure to type it in capital, so capital system, which will take the value between the double quotes of file, column, 3 slashes, and then @c/passwd. This is the file that we want to get the contents from. Let's not forget to close off our tags, like this, and this will be our payload for the xxe. We are using this system parameter. We define it in order to get our external entity to load the file. In our case, the file that we're loading is @c/passwd. If this works correctly, once we load it, the server should show the content of this file in the response to our request. Let's copy this. Go back to our burp suite. Let's delete this. Paste our new payload. And since we called it once again internal entity, there is nothing really to change right here. We can leave it to be internal entity. But if you were to call it differently in your payload, make sure you switch the name right here as well. Awesome. Let's send this. And here it is. We get the output of /@c/passwd file on the target system. And this is xxe vulnerability. Now that we covered that, we're going to take a look at a different type of vulnerability in the next lecture, which is called components with known vulnerabilities. See you there.